What do you do when the only person who makes you feel alive is the one who could destroy everything? I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who could betray her husband. I was the dependable one, the wife who remembered anniversaries, the stepmother who baked birthday cakes, the woman who smiled politely at dinner parties while her soul withered inside. But loneliness does terrible things to a person. It gnaws at your edges until you're hollow, until you'd do anything, just to feel seen again. And then he came back. My stepson Mike, 24 years old with his father's sharp jawline but none of his coldness. He visited that summer under the guise of helping me while my husband was away on business. "You look tired, Susan," he said on his first night home, his voice softer than I remembered. "Let me take care of you for once." It should have been innocent, a kind gesture from a young man who'd grown up. But the way he looked at me, like I was still someone worth noticing, sent a shiver down my spine. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining the lingering touches when he handed me a coffee, the way his gaze dropped to my lips when I laughed. But then came the night on the porch. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine, the sky streaked with twilight. We were drinking wine, too much of it, and he said something that cracked me open. "You don't have to pretend with me." Just like that, the walls I'd built over years of a dying marriage crumbled. I wanted to sob, to scream, to lean into him and let the world burn. And that's when I knew I was in danger. Because Mike wasn't just being kind, he was studying me, learning me, and God help me, I liked it. For the first time in a decade, I didn't feel invisible. But that kind of attention comes with a price, one I wouldn't understand until it was too late. This isn't a story about passion, it's about hunger. The kind that lives in the quiet spaces between polite conversation, in the way a man's shirt stretches over his shoulders when he reaches for a glass, in the way a woman forgets to breathe when his fingers brush hers. By the time I realized what was happening, I was already lost. And the worst part, I didn't even try to stop it. My name is Susan Taylor, and if you had told me 5 years ago that I would be standing at the edge of my own ruin, I would have laughed in your face. I was the kind of woman people called steady, the one who organized charity galas, who remembered everyone's coffee orders, who smiled through the quiet agony of a marriage that had long since turned into a business arrangement. I met James when I was 32, already wary of love, but still hopeful. He was a corporate lawyer, sharp and commanding, with a smile that could charm a room into silence. Back then, I mistook his confidence for passion, his decisiveness for devotion. By the time I realized his heart was made of spreadsheets and cold logic, we were already married. And then there was Mike. James's son from his first marriage was 14 when I came into his life, a lanky boy with guarded eyes and a quiet intensity. I tried my best to be a good stepmother, but Mike was never rude, never rebellious, just distant, polite in a way that felt like armor. He called me Susan, never Mom, and I never asked him to. Years passed. James buried himself in work, and I buried myself in the illusion of a perfect life. We lived in a beautiful house in Connecticut, the kind with a wraparound porch and hydrangeas that bloomed every June. From the outside, it looked like a postcard. Inside, it was a museum, everything carefully arranged, untouched. Then Mike left for college, and the silence grew louder. James was gone more often than not. Business trips, client dinners, golf weekends that stretched into Mondays. I told myself it was fine. I had my book club, my yoga classes, my charity work. But there's a special kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people and still feeling unseen. And then last summer, Mike came home. Not for long, just a few weeks between graduating law school and starting his job in New York. He was different now, taller, broader, with a quiet confidence that made the air around him hum. But it wasn't just his looks. It was the way he looked at me, like he actually saw me. The first night he cooked dinner. "You've lost weight," he said, sliding a plate of rosemary chicken in front of me. "You should take better care of yourself." It was such a simple thing. But James hadn't noticed my weight loss, or the dark circles under my eyes, or the way I'd stopped wearing the perfume he'd bought me because he never commented on it anyway. Mike noticed. That's how it started. Not with a touch, not with a confession, with attention. The kind I hadn't realized I was starving for. He asked me about my favorite books. He remembered how I took my tea. He laughed at my jokes. Not the polite, hollow laugh of a dinner guest, but the real kind. the kind that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. Felt like waking up after years of sleepwalking, and that was the problem. Because the more awake I felt, the more I noticed the cracks in my marriage. The way James's voice turned dismissive when I talked about my painting. The way he'd scroll through his phone while I spoke, as if my words were background noise. Mike didn't scroll, he listened. I wish I could say I resisted, that I was stronger than this. But the truth, I didn't want to. The humid July air clung to my skin as I sat on the porch swing, a half-empty glass of Pinot Noir dangling from my fingers. James had called earlier. Another last-minute cancellation. Something came up with the Henderson case. I'll be back Friday. He didn't ask if I minded. He never did. The screen door creaked open behind me. You're out here late. Mike's voice was low, rough with sleep. He sank onto the swing beside me, close enough that I caught the scent of his shampoo, something woodsy expensive. Not the cheap citrus body wash he'd used as a teenager. Couldn't sleep, I lied. The truth was, I'd started avoiding our bedroom. The king-sized mattress felt like a tundra, the silence between James's snores deafening. Mike studied me in the moonlight. He's not coming home again, is he? The question shouldn't have shocked me. The whole neighborhood probably knew about James's business trips by now, but hearing it aloud in Mike's steady voice made my throat tighten. It's complicated, I whispered. No, it's not. His hand covered mine on the swing's chain, warm, heavy. You deserve better. And there was the spark that ignited everything. Not lust, not some tawdry fantasy, recognition, the kind that cracks ribs and leaves you gasping. Because for the first time in 12 years, someone had named the truth I'd been choking on. I was starving. And James had been the one holding the bread just out of reach. I don't know which of us moved first. Maybe we both did. But suddenly his forehead was pressed against mine, his breath uneven. Susan, tell me to stop. I should have. God knows I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my head, always ending with me walking away. But the wine and the moonlight and the wanting twisted my resolve into something reckless. I can't, I breathed. His lips brushed mine once, twice, testing. When I didn't pull away, his fingers tangled in my hair, pulling me closer until there was no space left for guilt. The swing creaked under us, a metronome counting down the seconds until everything shattered. Then the porch light flicked on. We jerked apart like thieves caught mid-heist. My pulse roared in my ears as Mrs. Calloway's Yorkie started yapping next door. Mike's chest rose and fell rapidly, his pupils blown wide. We can't, I began. I know, he interrupted. But his thumb traced the inside of my wrist where my pulse jumped. But we will. The morning after the porch, I woke with a dry mouth and a sick twist of guilt in my stomach. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, too bright, too cheerful for the storm raging inside me. I half expected Mike to be gone, to have packed his things in the night and vanished back to New York. But when I crept downstairs, there he was, scrambling eggs at the stove like nothing had happened. Hungry, he asked, glancing over his shoulder. His smile was easy, familiar, as if we hadn't been a breath away from destroying everything last night. That's when I realized this was far from over. James wasn't supposed to be home until Friday. But on Wednesday evening, his Mercedes rolled into the driveway just as Mike and I were clearing the dinner dishes. My hands froze around the plates. Dad's home early, Mike murmured. His eyes locked onto mine, dark and unreadable. James strode in, briefcase in hand, already talking before the door closed behind him. Henderson settled, figured I'd surprise you. He kissed my cheek, a dry, perfunctory peck. Then clapped Mike on the shoulder. Good to see you, son. I waited for the earth to crack open beneath us, for James to take one look at my flushed face, or Mike's too casual posture and know. But he just loosened his tie and headed for the liquor cabinet, oblivious. That should have been a relief. Instead, it stung. Lying to James was nothing new. I'd been pretending for years. Pretending his indifference didn't hurt, pretending I didn't notice the lipstick on his collar that wasn't mine. But lying with Mike, that was new territory. Susan and I went to that new Italian place last night. Mike sat over dinner, swirling his wine. You'd hate it, Dad. Too much garlic. Complete fabrication. We'd eaten takeout on the couch, knees brushing, the air between us thick with everything we weren't saying. James chuckled. Smart kid, remembering my allergies. The ease with which Mike lied should have terrified me. Instead, it thrilled me. Here was someone who could keep up. Thursday morning, James left for the office. The second his taillights disappeared, Mike backed me against the refrigerator, hands caging me in. "Tell me you've thought about last night," he demanded. I had, every second. But before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from James. "Forgot my presentation folder. It's on my desk. Can you bring it to the office?" Mike's grip tightened. "Ignore it." "I can't," I whispered, already pulling away. "He'll come back looking for it." For the first time, frustration flashed across Mike's face. "Always running to him, aren't you?" The accusation hung between us, ugly and true. Even now, even after everything, I was still prioritizing James. Mrs. Calloway had lived next door for 20 years. She'd watched Mike grow up, which is why her knowing smile when she caught us planting hydrangeas together set my teeth on edge. "You two are awfully close these days," she remarked, sipping her iced tea. Mike's hand stilled on the shovel, just helping Susan with the garden, Her eyes flicked between us. James never did have a green thumb. The implication was clear. She suspected, and if she did, others would too. Saturday night, James's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while he showered. I told myself I wouldn't look. But then I saw the name, Elena. The message preview burned into my retinas. "Last night was incredible. When can I see you?" The shower cut off. I dropped the phone like it was on fire. Mike found me on the back patio minutes later, shaking. "Susan." I showed him the text. Instead of outrage, his expression hardened with something like triumph. "Now you see," he said softly, "you're not the only one betraying this marriage." And just like that, the last thread of my guilt snapped. The revelation of James's infidelity should have shattered me. Instead, it set me free. For weeks, I had carried the crushing weight of guilt, convinced I was the villain in this story. But now, holding Mike's gaze as the truth of James's betrayal pulsed between us, I felt something dangerous uncoiling inside me. Relief. Mike saw it too. His fingers traced my cheekbone, featherlight. "You don't have to pretend anymore." And just like that, the last of my resistance crumbled. 3 days later, James left for another business trip. This time, I didn't bother asking which hotel he'd be at. I simply waited until his car disappeared down the driveway before turning to Mike with a quiet certainty that terrified me. "Show me what it feels like to be wanted." The words hung between us, a challenge and a surrender all at once. Mike's eyes darkened, but he didn't move. Once we start this, there's no going back. I reached for him first. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets that smelled of him, the reality of what we'd done settled over me like a fog. Mike slept beside me, his breathing deep and even. One arm slung possessively across my waist. This wasn't some impulsive mistake. This was calculated. And the terrifying part, I didn't regret it. The first crack in our fragile new reality appeared at breakfast. "You're quiet," Mike observed, sliding a cup of coffee toward me. His thumb brushed mine as I took it, a casual intimacy that made my breath catch. I wrapped both hands around the mug. "What happens when your father comes home?" Mike's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We'll figure it out." James returned home that Friday in unusually high spirits. He barely glanced at me before launching into a story about some corporate victory. I nodded along mechanically until he paused mid-sentence, his gaze catching on something behind me. My blood turned to ice. Mike's watch, a distinctive silver Rolex, sat on the kitchen counter. The same watch James had given him for graduation, the same watch that had been on my nightstand just hours ago. James's brow furrowed. "That's odd. Mike left that here." My mouth went dry. "He stopped by yesterday to pick up some mail." Beat of silence. Then James shrugged and poured himself a scotch. Crisis averted this time. That night, Mike cornered me in the laundry room. "We can't keep doing this." My heart stuttered. Was he having second thoughts? But then he continued, his voice low and urgent. "I want you, all of you, not just stolen moments when Dad's away." The implication hung between us. heavy and impossible. He was talking about leaving James, about us being together, openly. The rational part of me knew this was madness, but the part of me that had spent years starving for affection, that part leaned in closer. "Give me time," I whispered. Time ran out faster than I expected. It happened on a Tuesday. James came home early again, but this time he wasn't alone. Elena, the woman from the texts, stood beside him in our foyer, her manicured hand resting on his arm. "Susan, this is Elena," James said, as casually as if he were introducing a new colleague. "She'll be staying with us for a few days." The audacity stole my breath. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Mike appeared in the doorway behind them, his expression unreadable. When our eyes met, I saw the same realization dawning in his gaze. This changes everything. That night, I found Mike pacing by the pool. He brought her here, he spat, running a hand through his hair, like you wouldn't notice, like it wouldn't matter. The raw fury in his voice startled me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was personal for him, too. I reached for his arm. "Mike!" He turned on me suddenly, his grip tightening. "Tell me you're done. Tell me you'll leave him." The ultimatum hung between us, sharp as a blade. In that moment, I realized with terrifying clarity, I had to choose. Not between James and Mike, but between the woman I'd been and the woman I was becoming. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly who I wanted to be. 3 days after James brought Elena into our home, I packed a suitcase. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming matches, no shattered dishes, just the quiet, methodical folding of blouses and the careful wrapping of my grandmother's pearl earrings in tissue paper. The only sound was the hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of the house settling around me, as if it too were holding its breath. Mike leaned against the doorframe, watching. "You're really doing this? It wasn't a question." I snapped the suitcase shut. "You knew I would." The truth was I had no other choice. Not after seeing the way Elena touched James's arm at dinner last night, her fingers lingering just a second too long. Not after catching the way he looked at her. With a warmth I hadn't seen in his eyes for years, the realization had hit me like a physical blow. I had already lost him. And worse, he didn't even care. James found me in the kitchen, my suitcase by the back door. For a moment, he just stared at it, his brow furrowing, going somewhere. The casualness of his tone, the sheer unawareness, ignited something inside me. "Yes," I said, matching his detachment. "I think it's time." He blinked. Time for what? To stop pretending. The words hung between us, heavy with everything I wasn't saying. For a heartbeat, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Confusion, maybe even panic. But then it was gone, smoothed over by that practiced lawyer's calm. "Susan." He began, but I cut him off. "Don't," picked up my suitcase. "We both know this marriage has been over for a long time." I expected an argument, plea, something. But James just exhaled sharply through his nose and nodded. "If that's what you want." That was the moment I knew I'd made the right decision. I moved into a rented apartment downtown, a small sunlit space with peeling wallpaper and a view of the river. It was nothing like the sprawling colonial we'd shared. But for the first time in years, it felt like mine. Mike helped me unpack. He hung my paintings, stocked the fridge with my favorite wine, even bought a ridiculous pink orchid because he remembered I liked them. Should have felt like a fresh start. But then night fell, alone in my new bed. The weight of what I'd done pressed down on me. I had left my husband for his son. The reality of it was monstrous. Even to me. What kind of woman did that make me? Mike sensed my hesitation. He started staying over more often, his presence a constant reassurance. But the closer we became, the more I noticed the little things. The way his jaw tightened when I mentioned James. The possessive grip of his hand on my waist in public. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, I made the mistake of laughing at a memory of James. Mike's knife stilled against the cutting board. "You miss him." It wasn't a question. Hesitated. I miss who he used to be. The admission hung between us. Dangerous. Mike's expression darkened, but he said nothing. That night, he was rougher with me than usual. His touches edged with something that felt like punishment. Friends stopped calling. At first, I told myself they just needed time to adjust. But then I ran into Margaret from the book club at the grocery store, and the way she hurried down the cereal aisle to avoid me said everything. The truth was, no one wanted to be associated with the woman who'd left her husband for her stepson. I was a scandal, a cautionary tale. Mike became my only lifeline, and he knew it. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. I was scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up. A tagged photo of James and Elena at some charity gala. They looked happy. Normal. A lump formed in my throat. That should have been me. Mike snatched the phone from my hands, his face hard. "Why do you keep doing this to yourself?" I stared at him, suddenly exhausted. "'Cause he was my husband, Mike. You don't just erase 12 years. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. I erased 18. The silence that followed was deafening. That night, I dreamed of James. We were standing in our old kitchen, the one with the yellow curtains I'd loved. He was smiling at me the way he used to, like I was the only person in the world who mattered. When I woke up, my cheeks were wet. Mike was already awake, watching me. You said his name in your sleep. I sat up, my heart pounding. It was just a dream. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then quietly, "You're not over him." I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Mike stood abruptly. "I need some air." The door slammed behind him. Alone in the bed we'd shared, I finally let myself cry. The morning after the dream, Mike didn't come back. I told myself he just needed space, that he'd cool off and return with that easy smile of his, maybe even flowers and an apology. But by noon, my phone remained silent. By evening, the gnawing in my stomach had turned to dread. It wasn't until I checked my email that I understood. Subject, "Don't try to contact me." The message was brutally short. This was a mistake. "I'm going back to New York. Don't call. Don't write. You're still in love with him, and I won't be second best to my own father." The words blurred as my hands began to shake. I read them 3 times before the truth sank in. He had left me, just like James, just like everyone else. The next week passed in a haze of wine and silence. I stopped answering emails, stopped showering, stopped caring. My apartment, once filled with Mike's laughter and the promise of a new beginning, now felt like a tomb. The orchid he'd bought me wilted in its pot, its petals curling inward like fists. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. On the 8th day, the doorbell rang. I ignored it at first, assuming it was the mailman or some door-to-door salesman. But then it came again, insistent, impatient. Wrapping my robe tighter around myself, I peered through the peephole. James stood on the other side, my breath caught. He looked older, his hair grayer at the temples, but his posture was as rigid as ever. For a wild moment, I considered not answering. But then his voice cut through the door, sharp and familiar. "Susan, I know you're in there. Open the door." James's gaze swept over me, my tangled hair, the dark circles under my eyes, the wine stain on my sleeve. His lip curled. Pathetic. The word should have stung. Instead, it lit a spark of defiance in my chest. "Why are you here, James?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood. Mike came to see me. The air left my lungs. "He told me everything," James continued, his voice dangerously calm. "How you seduced him, how you manipulated him, how you destroyed my family." I barked out a laugh. "Your family. You brought your mistress into our home." James's expression didn't change. Elena was a colleague, nothing more. The world tilted. What? The texts? The hotel stays? Choked out? "A test," he said simply. "To see if you still cared enough to notice." The floor dropped out from under me. It spilled out of him then, the whole ugly truth. James had suspected Mike's feelings for me months before anything happened. The business trips, the coldness, even Elena. All of it had been a ploy to push me away, to see if I'd take the bait. "I wanted you to fight for us," he admitted, his voice cracking for the first time. "But you just let go." The irony was unbearable. All this time I'd thought I was the one betrayed. But James had been playing chess while I was stumbling through checkers. And Mike had been nothing more than a pawn. James handed me an envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Divorce papers already signed. "It's over," he said. I stared at the document, the black ink blurring. 12 years of marriage, reduced to a dotted line. "What happens now?" I whispered. James adjusted his cufflinks, the gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "Now, you live with the consequences." And with that, he walked out, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my choices. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. James kept the house, kept the apartment. Mike blocked my number. I tried to rebuild, got a job at a small art gallery, made awkward small talk with neighbors who still whispered behind my back. But every morning I woke up with the same hollow ache in my chest, the same unanswerable question: was it worth it? A year later, I saw Mike. He was across the street from my apartment, waiting at a traffic light in a tailored suit. His hair shorter, his jaw sharper. For a heartbeat, our eyes met. Then the light changed, and he walked away without looking back. I didn't call out, didn't chase him, just stood there, watching as he disappeared into the crowd. Another ghost in a city full of them. They say the truth will set you free, but no one tells you that freedom feels an awful lot like loneliness.